the third year with Paul. As usual, after our lingering intimacy ended, I found myself thinking again about his casual words. I honestly don't know what my family is worried about. I'm not going to marry her anyway. I don't like trouble, and she's clean and obedient. When he came out of the shower, I stopped him. Next month, I'll be 26. My parents want me to go back home, meet potential partners, and get married. I agreed. Paul nodded and casually lit a cigarette. That's good. When the time comes, tell me your fiancé's name. I'll help you check him out. He wrapped me in a gentle embrace, but his voice was cool and detached. After all, we've been together for a while. I can't just let someone make you suffer. Chapter 1. It had already been 3 years with Paul. No one would have imagined that I would become the woman who stayed with him the longest. And no one would have imagined that the heir to a corporate empire, known to the world as serious, reserved, and relentlessly disciplined, could be so indulgent in private. His needs in that regard had always been strong. Even after 3 years together, I still hadn't completely gotten used to it, perhaps sensing that my mind was wandering. Paul pulled me closer by the waist and pressed me more firmly against his chest. What are you thinking about? I lifted my eyes and met his unfathomably dark gaze. You're too heavy. I frowned slightly, my eyes already misted over. Paul seemed to chuckle. Such a princess. He lowered his head and kissed me. I returned the kiss, then brushed kisses along his jaw and throat. A muffled sound escaped him as his long fingers tightened around my waist. At nearly 29, despite carrying the burden of an overwhelming workload, he had maintained an exceptional physique. Over these years, I had enjoyed my time with him too. It wasn't as though I had lost out. Running my hand over his lean, firm waist, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to sink into the moment. Chapter 2. By the time everything was over, an hour had passed. Paul kissed me gently while I lay there soft and dazed, my eyes unfocused. Before getting up and heading to the bathroom, the sound of running water slowly pulled my thoughts back. In 3 years together, it wasn't as though I had never entertained unrealistic dreams, but I had always known clearly that there was no future between us. Still, hearing it with my own ears was a different feeling altogether. He was a man of few words and rarely showed much emotion when speaking. Only on that night, after getting drunk, had he let slip a few honest thoughts, and every word carried the same message. Indifference. What is the Law family so worried about? I'm not going to marry her anyway. But Paul, you've been together for 3 years. Surely there's some affection there? I don't like trouble. She's always been obedient and well-behaved. I'm a clean freak. She's very clean. That's all. Thinking of those words, I couldn't help letting out a quiet laugh. That was right. When I first got together with him, I had been nothing more than a blank sheet of paper, plain and inexperienced. He had shaped me little by little according to his preferences, to the point that the Alice of today, from the way she dressed to the things she liked, had become exactly what he liked best. But that was all it was. Nothing more. Chapter 3. Paul came out after drying his hair and began getting dressed. Naturally, he handed me his tie. Standing before him, I barely reached his chest. I had to rise onto my toes just to loop the tie around his collar. As I adjusted it, I called his name. Paul. HM? I'll be 26 next month. What birthday gift do you want? He lowered his head to kiss me, but I turned away. My parents want me to go back home for blind dates and marriage. Paul looked at me for a moment before letting go and nodding. He picked up the cigarette case and lighter from the table and lit another cigarette. I walked over and opened the window. His deep voice came from behind me. That's good. Without realizing it, my fingers tugged hard at the tassel hanging from the curtain. I stared blankly out the window. This was the very heart of the capital, where every inch of land was worth a fortune. Luxury apartments here cost tens or even hundreds of millions. If it weren't for Paul, I would never even have had the chance to step into a place like this. When I was younger, I had dreamed of being Cinderella, but now, it was time to wake up. Paul wrapped his arms around me from behind. The faint scent of tobacco surrounded me. When the time comes, tell me your fiancé's name. I'll help you check him out. His lips brushed against my ear. The gesture was gentle, but his voice remained cool and detached. After all, we've been together. His tone was light, carrying a rare hint of teasing. I can't bear to see someone else make you suffer. Chapter 4. I forced the corners of my mouth upward, trying to make my smile look less stiff. No need. The arm around my waist seemed to tighten suddenly, but a moment later, it loosened again. I stepped out of his embrace at the right moment. I'm on leave for the next couple of days. I'll pack up my things and move out as soon as possible. Paul stubbed out his cigarette and glanced at me without much emotion. Suit yourself. He turned and walked into the walk-in closet. Soon, he came back out carrying his suit jacket. I watched him head toward the door, all the way to the entryway. Paul. He stopped walking but didn't turn around. I stared absent-mindedly at his back. It was hard to imagine that only a few dozen minutes earlier, he had been kissing me and calling me Ollie. A sudden sting filled my nose, and I hurriedly held back the tears threatening to spill over. Should I leave the access card with the security desk? Or, whatever, I won't be living here anymore. Paul tossed out the answer and opened the door. Then he left. The sound of the door closing was a little too loud, like a heavy blow landing directly on my heart. After he was gone, the entire apartment seemed to become empty in an instant. I sat on the sofa for a long time, feeling completely drained. Only then did I pull myself together and begin packing my belongings. Chapter 5. After finishing my packing, I started writing my resignation letter. There was still some work that needed to be handed over before I left. I would have to stay in Beijing for a few more days. I booked a cheap hotel online and moved in temporarily. Suddenly, I found myself with plenty of free time. A college classmate had recently returned from overseas after building a successful career and was organizing a reunion. The venue was an incredibly upscale hotel. Since I was already in the capital, it would have been strange not to attend. What I didn't expect was that James, the legendary senior everyone had admired back in college, would show up as well. The moment he pushed open the private room door, every woman in the room erupted into excited screams. James, you actually came back to China. Oh my God, you're even more handsome than you were in college. Senior James, I had a crush on you for 2 whole years. Who didn't have a crush on Senior James? Ollie, right? The girl sitting beside me grabbed my arm excitedly and shook it. Instinctively, I looked toward James. He stood there with his black suit jacket draped over one arm, tall, slender, and elegant, just like he had been back then. His gaze passed over everyone else before settling on me. Ollie, long time no see. Senior James, long time no see. A warm smile slowly spread across his eyes. You've become even prettier. You've really grown up. Chapter 6. After the reunion ended, everyone tacitly agreed that James should drive me home. I had a few drinks. My cheeks were flushed, and my steps felt a little unsteady. When we stepped out of the elevator, James gentlemanly reached out to steady me. I quickly thanked him softly, but before I could pull my arm away, I felt a sharp gaze coming from somewhere nearby. I looked over instinctively and met Paul's cold eyes. Surrounded by a group of people, he stood beneath the dazzling lights of the grand lobby. That handsome, chiseled face remained as expressionless as ever, yet his displeasure was unmistakable. I was only startled for 2 seconds before looking away and continuing toward the exit. But James called after me. Ollie, wait a second. Let me say hello to a friend. I stayed where I was and watched James walk over to Paul with a smile. Paul, long time no see. What a small world. The two exchanged greetings and casual conversation like old friends. I deliberately moved farther away, hoping to avoid them, yet I still heard Paul's calm voice. Your girlfriend? James laughed. She's a junior from my university. Then he added meaningfully. As for becoming my girlfriend, I still have some work to do. Paul gave a slight nod. She's beautiful. Keep trying. James was clearly surprised, but also delighted. So you think Ollie is beautiful too? Back in college she was just a sweet, innocent little girl. It's only been a few years, and I almost didn't recognize her. Paul's gaze once again settled on the graceful figure in the distance. A wine-red slip dress, a rare pair of black stiletto heels. She had clearly put effort into her appearance tonight, and she really did look different. Without revealing anything, he replied, I have something to take care of tonight. We'll get together properly another day. Sure, go ahead. I'll take Ollie home first. James watched Paul disappear into the elevator before turning back. Been waiting long? Let me take you home. I shook my head, followed him outside, and got into the car. The man just now, the heir to Haima Group, is quite an extraordinary person. Really? I don't know much about him. We were classmates for 2 years in high school before he went abroad. James glanced at me, but although he seems cold and difficult to approach, when he was younger, he was actually a hopeless romantic. My fingers unconsciously tightened against the hem of my dress, and in that instant, it felt as though my heart had suddenly skipped a beat. Chapter 7. It was a junior he dated while studying abroad. She was from South City, and her family was unbelievably wealthy. Back then, they were the golden couple of the international student circle. At this point, James glanced at me again. Now that I think about it, you actually resemble her a little. Something inside my chest tightened suddenly. A dense ache of bitterness and sorrow spread through me, nearly filling my entire heart. It took me quite a while before I found my voice. What happened afterward? Well, from what I heard, she didn't want to move to the capital after marriage. She wanted him to build his future in South City instead. James smiled and shook his head. But he was the only son of the Law family. How could he possibly abandon such a massive family empire and follow a woman to South City? Because of that, they eventually fell out. They were both young and proud. Neither was willing to compromise. So they ended things for good. That's a shame. It really is. James sighed softly. I heard that back then. He almost lost his life because of that girl. I slowly lowered my gaze and quietly loosened my clenched fist. My palm was covered in sweat. The reason people in positions of power can navigate love and relationships so effortlessly is because they have already seen countless storms. Someone has already loved them with reckless devotion. They have already gone mad for someone else before. So no matter how passionate the love of those who come afterward may be, to them, it is nothing more than a passing note, a simple suit yourself, a simple that's good, and not the slightest ripple will ever rise in their hearts because of you. Chapter 8. Ollie. Remember to accept my friend request on WeChat when you get back. James opened the car door for me. I thanked him and stepped out. He glanced at the hotel and frowned slightly. Do you want to switch hotels? It's not very safe for a girl to stay here alone. It's okay. I'll only be here for another day or two. Then call me if you need anything. As he spoke, he reached out and lightly patted the top of my head, just like he used to in college. Don't be so formal with your senior, okay? Instinctively, I took a step back and avoided the gesture. A trace of disappointment flashed through James's eyes, but it disappeared almost immediately. It's late. Go on inside. I waved goodbye and turned toward the hotel. Inside the dim elevator, I leaned against the wall, feeling dizzy and weak. I wasn't actually that drunk. It was just that my heart felt as though a massive stone were pressing down on it. The weight of it was almost driving me insane. When I got off the elevator, I took out my key card and unlocked the door. The moment I pushed it open, a warm hand suddenly wrapped tightly around my wrist. Before I could react, I was pulled into a hard, solid chest. Instinct took over. I struggled desperately and screamed, "Alice!" "It's me!" The familiar voice rang out. My eyes widened abruptly. Only then did I realize the man standing before me was Paul. "Why you? How are you in my room?" Paul looked down at me. He released my wrist, only to grip my chin instead. A seamless transition. "Huh, Ollie, you've really impressed me. We've already broken up." Before I could finish, anger suddenly flashed across Paul's face. He pinned me against the back of the door. His eyes were dark and stormy, filled with unmistakable hostility. Fear rose inside me. I pushed against him desperately, but he refused to budge. Paul knew me too well, far too well. Every weakness, every reaction. It made resisting him feel impossible. Humiliation and anger surged through me. I lifted my leg and tried to kick him. His hand immediately caught my calf. Only after reducing me to tears did he finally loosen his grip. "Alice, go tell James something." "Tell him what?" I glared at him through reddened eyes. Paul curved his lips into a faint smile. "Tell him that the sweet, innocent Ollie he keeps talking about," he paused, "isn't nearly as composed as he thinks." His gaze locked onto mine. "Ollie, tell me, for someone as confident as him, Do you think he'll still keep pursuing you? Chapter 9. I did not panic, nor did I lose my composure. Once my emotions settled, I looked at Paul Law and said, Mr. Law, are you leaving now, or would you prefer to wait for the police to escort you out after I call them? The look in Paul's eyes gradually darkened. Alice, you know my temper. Of course I do. That was precisely why every decision I had made was neither an emotional outburst nor a strategic attempt to make him stay. I had truly thought it through. I wanted to end things with him completely. After 3 years together, nearly all of my rationality had been consumed. I didn't dare imagine what would happen after 4 years, 5 years, or 7 years. How much more unbearable the pain would become. How impossible it would be to walk away. Better a sharp pain now than endless suffering later. Mr. Law, we've had a good 3 years together. You've treated me well. Being with you allowed me to see a much bigger world. I avoided many detours in life. I never had to endure hardship or suffer unfair treatment. I'm grateful to you. So now that we're separating, I don't want things to become ugly. If you leave now, I'll pretend none of this ever happened. Move. Paul suddenly interrupted me. His voice was cold and emotionless. Only the volume was slightly higher than usual. I took a deep breath and stepped aside. Paul did not look at me again, nor did he say another word. He opened the door and walked out. Tonight's unexpected visit had already pushed him to the limits of what he would ever do. He was a cold-hearted man, and he had never liked forcing people. A favored son of heaven, gifted with extraordinary ability. He had everything necessary to remain proud and self-assured for his entire life. He was not the sort of man who bowed his head. Back then, not even that wealthy heiress from Hong Kong had been able to make him compromise. Much less someone like me. I stared at the closed door and laughed at myself. The ache in my chest still lingered when I thought of the way he had looked while kissing me earlier. The pain returned all over again. Perhaps he did like me a little. Perhaps he truly was somewhat reluctant to let me go. But I could not leave myself an escape route anymore. Chapter 10. The day I finished handing over my work and officially resigned, I actually caught sight of Paul from afar in the office. But he didn't see me. Holding a cardboard box in my arms, I stood still and watched him step into his private elevator. Ollie, will you ever come back? One of my close coworkers asked reluctantly. Of course, if I get the chance, I'll come visit all of you. Everything was fine. Why did you suddenly decide to quit and go home to get married? You were my favorite work partner. Without you, work won't be nearly as fun. When you get married, you have to send me an invitation. I won't forget. Well then, I guess this is goodbye. I had worked here for 3 years. The environment was excellent, and my co-workers were wonderful. Now that it was time to leave, I really did feel a little reluctant. I took one last look at my desk. Then I carried my box into the elevator. Downstairs, I walked to the roadside and waited for my rideshare to arrive. What I didn't know was that, on the 36th floor, Paul was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window that occupied an entire wall. The cigarette between his fingers had accumulated a long trail of ash. Yet he never bothered to flick it away. Atlas sat on the sofa, watching his friends back with great amusement. Why do you look like someone who just got dumped? To Atlas, it was actually pretty interesting. He had met Paul's little girlfriend many times. She was exceptionally sweet and obedient, gentle and soft-spoken. He truly hadn't expected her to become so decisive all of a sudden. When she chose to leave, she did it cleanly, not a trace of hesitation. Paul slowly withdrew his gaze and flicked away the ash. Then he shot Atlas a cold look. Do you have nothing better to do? Atlas stood up, grabbed his suit jacket, and raised an eyebrow. How about your buddy takes you out for a drink? Paul didn't answer, but he still stubbed out his cigarette, picked up his jacket, and followed his friend out of the office. He was a workaholic. 99% of his energy was devoted to work, which was exactly why he couldn't quite understand it. Where, exactly, had things gone wrong between him and Alice? They spent almost every night together. The last time he traveled for business, he had brought back plenty of gifts for her. During the most recent holiday, they had celebrated together. He had given her flowers and jewelry. That day, he carefully reviewed every detail of their recent interactions. He couldn't find any mistakes, nor could he remember any moment when she seemed unhappy. For 3 years, she had always made things easy for him, and he had long since grown accustomed to having her by his side. Back when she came to the company as an intern, he had noticed her immediately and kept her in the executive secretary department. The result proved that his judgment had been right. Alice was like a soft marshmallow, sweet-looking, gentle by nature. Being with her made him feel relaxed, comfortable. A man is always generous toward the woman he likes. The apartment they had shared was already under her name. Originally, he had planned to give her both the property deed and the keys to a new car on their 3rd anniversary. She was timid. She had only gotten her driver's license last month. But then, out of nowhere, she announced that she was going back home for matchmaking and marriage. And immediately afterward, she submitted her resignation. At first, he had simply assumed she was throwing a tantrum for some unknown reason. He had even joked with her about it. Then, in the blink of an eye, he saw her going out with James. Sitting in the car, Paul sent a text message to his most trusted assistant. Look into Alice's college years. A famous senior, a beautiful, well-behaved junior. If something had happened between them in the past, that would be perfectly reasonable. Paul frowned slightly. If Alice had once liked James, then what exactly had it meant when she accepted Paul's pursuit? A strange irritation rose inside him, yet he couldn't identify where it came from. That night, he drank more than usual. At 1 in the morning, his driver took him home. Leaning back against the spacious rear seat, Paul closed his eyes tiredly. Suddenly, his phone vibrated several times. Paul picked it up and unlocked the screen. It was a text message from an unfamiliar number. Paul, I'm in Beijing now. Come pick me up. Chapter 11. Not long after I returned to my hometown, a former coworker I was close with sent me a gossip article. Ollie, our cold and abstinent CEO-law is making entertainment headlines. Looks like it's with his first love, a classic rekindled romance story. I was dazed for a moment. Yet, as if torturing myself, I still clicked on the video. The footage consisted of blurry paparazzi photos. There were pictures of a late-night airport pickup. There were photos of a young woman getting into a car, although only the hem of her dress and a slender calf were visible. It was enough to imagine how beautiful she must be. The final photo showed the two sitting across from each other at dinner. Paul used to take me to that restaurant often as well. The media's wording was extravagantly dramatic. The epic 7-year love story between a Hong Kong heiress and the heir of a prestigious capital family. It sounded incredibly moving. No wonder Paul has always kept women at a distance, so he's had someone in his heart all along. I replied with a few brief messages and then exited WeChat. That night, James had casually mentioned that I resembled that girl a little. Perhaps that was the reason why Paul had noticed me at first glance back when I was a timid intern who still carried a touch of awkwardness. There is no such thing as love at first sight so many times. People simply fall in love with the same person over and over again. Chapter 12. After 3 blind dates ended in failure, James sent me a message. Ollie, why can't you consider me? Back in college, I had been like countless other girls on campus. I had admired James too. He was handsome, talented, and exceptionally capable. Later, we got to know each other through a student club. He was always kind to me and took good care of me. At that age, I had secretly imagined that perhaps he treated me differently from other girls. Maybe he liked me a little too. Then one day, I accidentally discovered him embracing and kissing the famous beauty from the fine arts department. Only then did I realize that, in James's eyes, I was simply a cute junior. My girlish fantasy shattered, but I wasn't heartbroken for very long. After that, I gradually distanced myself from him. When James graduated and moved abroad, he told me to stay in touch. I smiled and agreed. Yet in the years that followed, I never contacted him, until now, when we met again. By then, all that remained in my heart was the affection of ordinary friendship. Ollie, why aren't you replying? Senior James, I'm turning 26 soon. I'm no longer interested in relationships that drag on for years without a result. James called me directly. Ollie, you're about to turn 26, but I'm already 28. I want a family even more than you do. So, do you understand what I mean? I fell silent for a moment. Let me think about it carefully, okay? Of course. Chapter 13. In the second month after I returned to my hometown, my father's old illness returned. 10 years ago, he had been diagnosed with cancer. The surgery had been successful, but 10 years later, without any warning, the cancer suddenly came back. This time, there was no hope of recovery. The doctor said he had, at most, 3 months left. When the test results came back, my mother broke down emotionally and cried. It's all because of those scandals of yours in Beijing. Last year, that man drove you home. One look at that car and you could tell it was expensive. Later, your cousin said it was called a Bentley and cost several million. Relatives and neighbors have all been gossiping, saying you were being kept by a rich man in Beijing. From that moment on, your father kept everything bottled up inside. Whenever your future marriage came up, he would drink and grieve. That's why his illness came back. As she spoke, my mother burst into tears again. Ollie, people from completely different worlds don't belong together. We were never the same kind of people as a man like that. When you suddenly quit your job and came home, I already knew. He got tired of you and threw you away. Your father felt sorry for you, but he didn't dare ask. He could only drink alone and suffer in silence. Can't you just marry an ordinary man and let your father leave this world with peace of mind? I stood there stiffly for a long time. In the end, I nodded. Okay, I'll do as you say. Chapter 14. After learning about my father's condition, James came to my hometown overnight. He helped arrange hospitals and medical specialists, running around tirelessly, doing everything he could. Someone with James's character and temperament was naturally easy to like. It didn't take long for him to win over my parents completely. When they learned that we had attended the same university and that James came from a respectable family, they were even more pleased, after discovering that I still hadn't accepted his pursuit. My parents began blaming me, but James defended me. It's my fault. I spent several years abroad. Naturally, Ollie and I grew distant. You have to give her time to get used to me again. Uncle, Auntie, please don't blame her. I'm the one who hasn't done enough. The day I walked him out, James stopped me. Ollie, to be honest, I do have my own selfish reasons. My family has been pressuring me to get married. They've been arranging blind dates nonstop, and I don't want to go. So I told them I already have a girlfriend and that we're preparing to register our marriage. Your father's health isn't good, and your future has been weighing heavily on his mind. Ollie, if you think I'm not a bad choice, would you be willing to give us a chance? Sometimes feelings can grow over time. Ollie, I'm not forcing you. I looked at him. Can I give you my answer tomorrow? James gently patted the top of my head and smiled warmly. Of course, but I'm afraid I won't be getting any sleep tonight. Chapter 15. After breaking up with Paul, I had never once deliberately followed any news about him. But that night, I searched for every recent article connected to him. He never denied the rumors about reconciling with the Hong Kong heiress. Yet all the photos and videos related to the story had mysteriously disappeared from the internet. Paul's most recent public appearance had been at a gala hosted by one of the capital's most influential figures. At the event, a reporter had tried to ask about his private life. His expression was icy. He didn't answer a single word. The bodyguards beside him immediately stopped the reporter. It was the first time I had seen him up close in months, even though it was only through a screen. And somehow, he felt completely unfamiliar, as though the 3 years we had spent sharing a bed had been nothing more than a dream I had imagined. Just before closing the page, I suddenly came across a post on Weibo. The post carried the hashtag Paul hashtag and had just been published in his fan community. Guys, I think I just ran into Paul and his first love. The attached photo was blurry, yet I recognized Paul's silhouette immediately. He was walking down a late-night street beside a petite young woman. She had turned toward him, saying something with a radiant smile on her face. Within minutes, the comments had exceeded 1,000. They look absolutely perfect together. My sister studied abroad in the same social circle back then. She said Paul and Miss Amy were ridiculously sweet together. Please tell us more. My sister said it was like watching a romantic drama every single day. I mean, a couple that attractive is practically once in 50 years. When they broke up, Miss Amy even attempted suicide. She almost lost her life. I stared at that comment, a little stunned. James had told me some things about Paul's past, but according to him, Paul had been the one who nearly lost his life after the breakup. Yet the comment section claimed it was Miss Amy. In truth, none of those old stories had anything to do with me. I simply couldn't imagine what a love story worthy of a romantic drama would have looked like for Paul, whatever it had been. It certainly wasn't as ordinary as the 3 years we had spent together, the day James and I registered our marriage. He asked if he could post about it on social media. Without thinking much, I agreed. James was in exceptionally high spirits. He pulled me into several photos, then tagged numerous friends. I also selected 2 pictures and posted them. My caption was simple: married. Not long afterward, James's phone began ringing nonstop, but he never answered. Again and again, he declined the calls. Shouldn't you answer that? I pointed at his phone. Something about his mood felt off. Wait for me in the car for a moment. James escorted me into the car before hurrying away with the still ringing phone in his hand. His back was turned toward me. I couldn't see his expression. The car door closed. I couldn't hear what he was saying either. But strangely, I didn't seem to care very much. My parents were overjoyed. They posted our marriage certificate and wedding photos in the family group chat. Then they sent several generous cash gifts. I smiled, sent a few red envelopes of my own, and exited the chat. Just then, my phone suddenly rang. The moment Paul's name appeared on the screen, a wave of dizziness washed over me. For a brief second, I felt completely frozen, but I quickly steadied myself. The phone rang until the very end. I never answered. A few seconds later, Paul called again. That was unusual for him. This time, I declined the call, and he never called back. When James finally returned, his expression was grim. He got into the car hurriedly. "Ollie, I'll take you to the hospital to see your father first. Something urgent came up, and I need to deal with it afterward." "Okay." When we arrived at the hospital, I stepped out of the car. The vehicle drove away almost immediately. I stood there quietly for a moment. Then I laughed softly. We were all adults. Deep down, everyone understood. Who doesn't have a past? Who doesn't have secrets? Chapter 16. That evening, James called me and said he had an urgent matter that required him to return to Beijing overnight. I didn't ask any questions. I simply told him to be careful on the road. After hanging up, I stood outside the hospital waiting for my rideshare. A third-tier city could never compare to the capital's bustling prosperity. It was only 10 o'clock at night, yet the streets were already much quieter. There were far fewer cars and pedestrians. Absent-mindedly, I kicked at the fallen leaves on the ground. I didn't even notice Paul's Bentley had been parked in front of me for quite some time. Not until the vehicle behind it honked. I looked up abruptly, the moment I saw that familiar car. It felt as though someone had cast a spell on me. I couldn't move. The rear window lowered. Paul's voice was as calm as ever. "Alice, get in." Gradually, I came back to my senses. Then I slowly took 2 steps backward. Not far away, the rideshare I had called was arriving. Its hazard lights blinked as it pulled toward the curb. I stopped looking at Paul. Instead, I walked straight toward the car. "Alice." Paul's voice suddenly rose. My footsteps paused briefly, but I never turned around. I was afraid I would break, afraid I would compromise. People are always a little weaker in front of someone they truly love. I didn't want to sink any deeper. I didn't want my father to leave this world with regrets. I didn't want to become the joke everyone whispered about, the woman who had been kept around for years and discarded when the man grew tired of her. I didn't want to be the only one left scarred in the end. I hurried to the rideshare, opened the door, and climbed inside. Then I asked the driver to leave immediately. What I hadn't expected was for Paul's car to follow us. "Miss, is that car following us?" The driver glanced into the rearview mirror and asked quietly. "Don't worry about it. Just keep driving." I leaned back in my seat and watched Paul's Bentley trailing closely behind. I knew I was weak. More than once, I almost asked the driver to pull over, but each time, I forced the words back down. Pull over for what? To return to his side? To continue living in that undefined relationship? To spend all my youth waiting? Yes, I could have had endless money, A life free from financial worries. But perhaps I would never be able to stand in the light. Just as I worked beside him every day. Just as I slept beside him every night. Yet no one in the company ever knew that I was his girlfriend. Chapter 17. After paying the fare and getting out of the car, the driver reminded me to hurry home. I thanked him, without even glancing at Paul's car. I headed quickly toward the residential complex gate, but Paul grabbed my wrist. Alice, let's talk. I don't want to talk to you, and there's nothing for us to talk about. I tried to shake his hand off. Instead, his grip tightened. Fine, then let me talk. Whatever it is can wait until tomorrow. It's late, Alice. His voice cut through mine. You broke up with me because of James. No, you had a crush on him in college, and now you finally got what you wanted, didn't you? No. I could no longer hold back. I looked up at the man in front of me. I had no idea where all his anger was coming from, nor did I understand why he was angry at all. Maybe it was because someone he believed he controlled completely had suddenly slipped beyond his reach, and he didn't know how to adapt. Or maybe it was because James and I had gotten married too quickly, because it wounded his pride. Other than that, I couldn't explain his behavior. No? Paul let out a quiet, self-mocking laugh. Alice, don't lie to me, whether I'm lying or not. What does that have to do with you? Of course it has something to do with me. Alice, you know what I hate most. Being deceived, being used. Paul had always been emotionally composed. During the 3 years we were together, I had never once seen him lose control. But tonight, his emotions were visibly unstable. I never deceived you, and I never used you. If you don't believe me, investigate all you want. Over the years, James and I had absolutely no contact. The first time I saw him again was at the class reunion a few days after we broke up. The same night you saw us together. Mr. Law. I looked directly at him. After a breakup, falling in love again or getting married isn't illegal, is it? Chapter 18. Paul looked at the woman standing before him. After several months apart, she had grown thinner. She looked exhausted as well. In the past, she had always smiled sweetly. There had been a warmth about her that naturally drew people in. Now, however, she seemed drained and lifeless. She was right. The first time she had seen James again really was after their breakup, and there was nothing wrong with falling in love or getting married after a relationship ended. Yet there was a fire burning inside him. The emotions trapped in his chest continued to swell, leaving him restless day and night. Atlas had once told him, "You're just used to having Alice around. Most people only need 21 days to adapt, forget, and move on." At first, Paul had believed that too. If Alice liked James, and if they had reunited and gotten together again, then he could congratulate them and let her go. But from the day they broke up until now, 3 sets of 21 days had already passed, and he still couldn't forget her. It was as though he had become addicted, as though she had become impossible to quit. Later, he had asked Atlas, "Then what about you and Jiang Jingqiu? You've been separated for 3 years. Have you adapted, forgotten, and moved on?" The only response he received was a long, long silence, and for a brief moment, Paul saw on his friend's face the same sense of loss he recognized in himself. Chapter 19. Mr. Law, do you remember when you drove me back to my hometown last year? I brushed my hair back and looked calmly at the man before me. The truth was, those relatives hadn't been entirely wrong. To me, it had been a 3-year relationship. To Paul, it had probably looked more like 3 years of keeping a mistress. Of course I remember. I lowered my eyes and smiled faintly. That was when some of my relatives saw your car. Afterward, rumors started spreading around town. They said I was being kept by a wealthy man in Beijing. My father was furious. He argued with them. He almost got into a fight. From then on, he was constantly upset and started drinking heavily again. And this year, his cancer came back. Alice, why didn't you tell me any of this? If I had told you, would you have married me? I looked up and smiled softly at him. My family is as ordinary can be. My parents never dreamed of me marrying into a wealthy family. They just wanted me to live honestly. They wanted their daughter to live a normal life and grow old peacefully. But you were never going to marry me. If I had never overheard those words that day, perhaps I wouldn't have awakened so quickly. Perhaps I wouldn't have walked away. Because James was willing to marry you. You married him? There was a faint redness in Paul's eyes. Alice, marriage isn't a game, but that's how the world works. Without marriage, a relationship is just a castle built in the air. At that, I couldn't help laughing at myself. Besides, you never loved me that much anyway. Alice, you're not me, but I can feel it. I looked at him quietly. Paul, you've loved someone before, so you should understand what it looks like when someone truly loves another person. He didn't answer. His brows merely drew together as he fell silent. Well, we've said everything that needed to be said. I can swear to you that while I was with you, my heart never wandered. Paul, for those 3 years, I really did love you. But that's all there is to say. Let's part on good terms. Please stop disturbing each other, okay? I looked at him one last time, then I forced back the tears threatening to spill over. The truth was, I had always been this kind of person. Paul had simply never cared enough to understand me. When I love someone, I give everything. I never divide my heart. But once it ends, it truly ends. I don't cling. I don't linger, even if it hurts. I endure it and keep walking. Alice, Paul called out to me again. I originally planned to give this to you on our 3rd anniversary. Now, consider it a wedding gift. He handed me a craft paper envelope. You know how I am. Once I give something away, I don't take it back. If you don't want it, or if it causes you trouble, throw it away. After saying that, he pressed the envelope into my hands. Then he turned around and walked away without looking back. Chapter 20. What Paul gave me was the property deed to that 300 square meter apartment in Beijing, and the keys to a fully loaded Volvo. I had always been timid. When I got my driver's license, it was because Paul had practically pushed me into taking the test. Even after passing, I was too scared to drive on the road. Paul had deliberately taken time out of his schedule and spent 2 days teaching me himself, perhaps because he knew how afraid of danger I was. He never chose some flashy sports car. He said it had been meant as our 3rd anniversary gift. Now, it was a wedding gift instead. The tears I had held back all night finally fell. I cried for a long time. I couldn't even explain what I was feeling. I had never regretted those 3 years. And perhaps, during those 3 years, he had truly cared about me, at least a little. There is a very ordinary saying, where the money goes, that's where the heart is. To him, these things may have been insignificant, but they made me feel that those 3 years had not been a battlefield I fought through alone. And that was enough. Chapter 21. 5 full days passed after James returned to Beijing. He never contacted me once. At the hospital, my mother looked worried. Did something happen on James's side? Why haven't we heard anything yet? And Ollie, did he say when he'd bring you to meet his parents? Mom, he already said his parents would come visit our family. Just focus on taking care of Dad. Don't worry about anything else. I just feel uneasy. You know, with someone as outstanding as James. My mother didn't finish her sentence, but I understood what she meant. Your daughter isn't bad either. I smiled and tried to reassure her. I'm just worried about that previous relationship of yours. A normal breakup isn't anything shameful. I just hope he doesn't misunderstand. I said nothing. In truth, it was normal for people to think that way. The gap between the two men was simply too large. Just then, James called. Ollie. His voice sounded exhausted. I'm sorry, but my parents' visit to your home may have to be postponed for a few days. My mother isn't feeling well and has been hospitalized. It's okay. Senior James, take care of Auntie first. There's no rush. Ollie. He seemed hesitant, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't. Senior James, honestly, I understand. If we end up separating someday, could you at least wait until after my father? Ollie, don't say things like that. Marriage isn't a game. Everyone seems to say that. Yet their actions were completely different. You should get back to your work. Senior James. I hung up. Inside the hospital room, my parents were chatting about something. The atmosphere was calm and peaceful. I didn't go inside and disturb them. Yet somehow, I had the strange feeling that this peace would not last much longer. Chapter 22. Before James returned. There was already new news from the hospital. A renowned specialist who had just returned from overseas happened to be consulting there. After reviewing my father's case, he proposed an entirely new treatment plan. Even in the worst-case scenario, it could extend my father's life to 6 months. Neither my mother nor I hesitated. We agreed immediately. Naturally, the treatment costs increased several times over as well. Fortunately, I could still afford it. What I never expected was what happened when I went to make the payment. The nurse informed me that someone had already deposited 1 million into my father's account. My first thought was James. I called him immediately, but he sounded surprised. Ollie, before I left for Beijing, I did prepay part of the medical expenses, but I only deposited 100,000. Maybe the hospital made a mistake. After ending the call, I went back to the nurse's station. They insisted there had been no mistake. The payer had specifically confirmed that the money was intended for my father. Immediately, I thought of Paul. The overseas specialist who had suddenly appeared at the hospital probably wasn't the result of our good fortune. It was probably someone Paul had arranged. After thinking about it for a long time, I ultimately returned the 1 million to him. Mr. Law, the money you previously gave me, along with my own savings, is enough to cover the medical expenses. But thank you, truly. Chapter 23. Paul received Alice's message while attending a somewhat tedious social gathering. James was there as well. The two men had once been on fairly good terms. Now, they were practically strangers. Anyone who knew the situation wisely avoided touching the subject, especially since Paul had looked displeased the entire evening. Yet James unexpectedly approached him first. Paul, the medical expenses for Ollie's father. That was you, wasn't it? Paul had already been in a terrible mood after receiving the transfer notification. At James's question, his reply carried an unusual edge. It was. As Alice's former employer, am I not allowed to show a little charity? Of course you are. James's tone remained as gentle as ever. But Ollie is my wife now. These are responsibilities that should belong to me as her husband. Paul, I'll return the money to you. I appreciate the gesture. No need. Paul suddenly stood up. His voice was icy. It's only 1 million. Consider it a charitable donation. But I would mind. James smiled lightly. Paul, there isn't a man alive who wouldn't mind something like this, right? Then keep minding it. Paul's cool gaze settled on James. You know Alice and I were together for 3 years. Don't you? The surroundings instantly fell silent. Who didn't know that Paul never discussed his private life? 4 years. Everyone had assumed he was single. Yet now, he was openly admitting that he had spent 3 years with a woman. And that woman had now married one of his former classmates. A man and a woman dating while both are single is perfectly normal. I've had girlfriends before as well. The smile on James's face deepened. But Ollie and I are husband and wife now. A dark, unreadable emotion flickered through Paul's eyes. Only legally. The implication was obvious. Legally married, but not truly husband and wife yet. That's only a matter of time. Things in Beijing have delayed us these past few days. You know Ollie. She's shy. She's sweet. Paul knew. Of course he knew. The first time they had slept together, Alice had cried so hard. He had spent nearly the entire night comforting her. At one point, he had even considered stopping, thinking that women were far too much trouble. Yet he hadn't been able to let her go. Alice had been the one he chose himself. Naturally, everything about her suited him perfectly. But now, Alice was James's wife, sleeping in the same bed, doing all the things married couples did. There was nothing unusual about it. Yet Paul felt as though a thorn had lodged itself deep inside his heart. A thorn that left him unable to sit still, unable to find peace. Merely imagining those possibilities was enough to make him feel unbearable discomfort. Never in his life had he disliked someone so intensely. He no longer wanted to look at James's gentle, handsome face for even a second. I'm not in a hurry. After all, we have an entire lifetime ahead of us. Those final words from James seemed to strike directly at Paul's deepest nerve. Paul had never been the type to expose another person's weaknesses in public. He avoided gossip and personal drama whenever possible. Yet now, absurdly enough, He found himself competing with another man out of jealousy in front of a crowd. "Mr. James, would you like me to remind you of something?" Paul's voice was calm, too calm. "Why exactly did your mother suddenly become ill and end up in the hospital? Could it have something to do with your half-sister?" The color drained from James's face instantly. "If you still have even a shred of conscience left." Paul stared at him. "Then you should tell Alice the truth as soon as possible." After saying that, he did not stay another moment. He turned around and walked straight out of the hall. Chapter 24. Paul did not transfer the extra $1 million to me. He didn't reply to any of my messages either. A proud man like him had enjoyed a smooth and successful life from the day he was born until now. Perhaps I was the only person who had ever failed to appreciate his kindness and managed to irritate him. At 3 in the morning, while I was sleeping soundly, someone knocked on my door. Still half asleep, I got up and looked through the peephole. To my surprise, I saw James, in the dimly lit living room, caught between sleep and wakefulness. I listened to a love story about him, Ollie. Anyway, this is how things happened. When I was in such a hurry to get our marriage certificate, it was because of my own selfish motives. I had run out of options. Vivi had disappeared without a trace. She told me that unless I got married someday, she would never appear in front of me again. She and I have been breaking up and getting back together for many years. But my mother could never accept her, and I know that her mother once destroyed my parents' marriage. James let out a bitter laugh. But, Ollie, love is just that mysterious. No one can control it. When you and I registered our marriage, my mother was actually very happy. She immediately wanted to come visit your family. But then Vivi came back to find me. When my mother found out, she was so angry that she ended up in the hospital. James covered his face in pain. To be honest, after all these years, I'm really tired. Back then, I was determined to use the marriage certificate to force her to come back and see me. But when she really did come back, I wasn't as happy as I thought I would be. Ollie, after all these years, do you think I was wrong? I hurt my mother. I hurt Vivi. And I hurt you, an innocent person. Most of all, as he spoke, he suddenly lost control and wrapped his arms around me. But, Ollie, I think I've really fallen in love with you. I was jealous when Paul transferred money to you, and when I found out you had been together for 3 years, I felt terrible. Ollie, can you give me a little time? I want to live a good life with you. Ollie, but I gently pushed James away. We were both just getting what we needed from this arrangement. Actually, I should thank you. Because of you, my father has been able to feel at ease. His condition has clearly improved during this period. When it came to my father, I paused, suppressing my emotions before continuing. When my father is gone, we'll get divorced. Ollie, you should go back now. Just come visit my father at the hospital when you have time. James swayed slightly as he stood up. His eyes were red, filled with pain and struggle. But in the end, he said nothing more. He simply turned around and left. Chapter 25. In the end, my father still didn't survive long enough to see 6 months pass. As he lay on his deathbed, he held my hand and looked toward James. He could no longer speak, but I could guess what he wanted to say. Parents love their children deeply. How could they fail to see what was really going on? He was worried that I would not have a happy marriage in the future. Holding back my tears, I gently took James's hand. Dad, don't worry about me. James and I will live a very happy life together. Dad, please rest assured, I will take good care of Ollie. At last, my father closed his eyes, but I knew that even then, he still carried worries about me in his heart. After the funeral, James and I separated peacefully. When we walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, he looked extremely depressed. Ollie, Vivi and I have completely ended things. If there's ever a chance, could I pursue you again? I shook my head. Just as you said, love is mysterious. It can't be forced. Let's not say anything else. Let's end it here. I smiled at him. My ride will be here soon. James, goodbye. Ollie. James suddenly stepped forward and pulled me into a tight embrace. It lasted only a moment, but he held me very firmly. When he let go, he gently pressed a kiss to my forehead. Before I could even react, a harsh car horn suddenly sounded. Instinctively, I turned around. And there it was, the familiar silver-gray Bentley. Paul was sitting in the back seat. His face was dark, and his lips were pressed into a tight line. For some reason, the gloom that had weighed heavily on my heart for so long suddenly felt as though the dark clouds covering it had been swept away. I couldn't help but smile. Chapter 26. After separating from James, I did not get back together with Paul. I simply continued working and living my life as usual. During that time, I even went on a blind date once. When Paul heard about it, he called me. "Next time you go on a blind date, let me screen the guy for you first. Haven't you learned enough from your previous experiences? Or, Alice, would you like to give us another try?" Thinking about the bizarre man I had met on that blind date a few days earlier, I suddenly felt that Paul's suggestion wasn't such a bad idea. Later on, even I couldn't clearly explain it, whether Paul and I had officially gotten back together or not. But after being single for so long, and having gotten used to his standards, I had to admit that I missed him quite a bit. So when he flirted with me, I simply went along with it. Before things went any further, though, I still asked him several questions. For example, the things he had said that day when he was drunk, and the matter of that wealthy heiress from Hong Kong, his so-called first love. Paul was surprisingly honest. At that time, I truly had no intention of getting married. You know how complicated my family situation is. My mother spent her entire life unhappy, yet she was trapped in her marriage and unable to escape. I was originally someone who never planned to marry. As for those things I said about you being sweet and pure, Paul gently touched my cheek and let out a soft sigh. "If we're going to talk about this, could you get off me first? In this situation, I can't have a calm conversation with you." Beneath the defined lines of his lower abdomen, the tension in his body was already obvious. If this continued, he might lose control at any moment. I climbed off him, but one of my legs still rested across his, and my hand remained on his sculpted abs. It had been more than a year. I really had missed this. I might as well consider it satisfying a physical need and balancing my hormones. After all, even if I started dating again, I probably wouldn't find someone as handsome and well-built as Paul. "Alice, when you came to intern at the company back then, I personally selected you. You were the one who caught my eye immediately. Everything about you was exactly the kind of person I liked. So everything I said was true. What about Miss Amy, then?" As I absent-mindedly traced the firm muscles of his torso, I became a little bolder and tried to move my hand lower. But Paul caught my mischievous hand before it could go any farther. Chapter 27. When I was studying abroad, I did date her for a while. After all, I was a teenager then, and everyone goes through that phase of first love and youthful feelings. But less than 2 weeks later, I realized she was completely out of control. She was using drugs and had a chaotic social life. So I broke up with her. The breakup was unpleasant. She attempted suicide twice. The last time, she almost died. So I still felt somewhat guilty about it. Last year, she came to the capital hoping to facilitate a partnership between her husband's company and mine. That's why we met a few times, and every conversation was strictly about business. Any other questions? So that was the truth. What looked like a romance straight out of a drama in outsiders' eyes was actually rather absurd and almost laughable. I shook my head. It seemed there was nothing else I needed to ask. "Then let me ask you something." Paul suddenly turned toward me and looked down at me from above. "You and James, nothing happened. Just the forehead kiss you saw that day. I'll choose to believe you this once." What an old-fashioned man. I'm old-fashioned? Paul seemed to chuckle softly. "Alice, have you forgotten how I used to deal with you? I really am starting to forget. Besides, it's been over a year. Who knows whether your methods still work or not." Before I could finish speaking, he pinned me beneath him. My head nearly hit the headboard, but he quickly reached out and protected me with one hand. A little frightened, I tried my old trick of acting pitiful. Paul knew all my tricks by heart and simply turned me over. I could barely handle it and whimpered softly, "Paul, there aren't any condoms." He lowered his head and kissed me, his warm breath brushing against the back of my neck. "Alice, we're going to get married." I froze for a moment, but I've already been married once. The atmosphere stalled for a brief second. Then what answered me was his fierce determination. A long while later, Paul gently bit the side of my neck. You are never allowed to say that again, and I never did. Throughout the many years that followed, I never brought up that ridiculous chapter involving James again, but the subject of marriage was also continually postponed. After all, I had a successful career, financial security, and a wonderful life. Things couldn't have been better. Paul, however, remained bothered by it. Over the years, James's career steadily declined. He became increasingly depressed, no longer the handsome and gentle man he once was. Meanwhile, Paul's career continued to reach new heights. I had also found a job I genuinely loved and excelled at. On the anniversary celebration of my company, Paul was in such a good mood that he drank a little too much. That night, in his drunken haze, he said to me, "Alice, you have no conscience." How do I have no conscience? You know exactly why. I couldn't help laughing. Fine, I have no conscience. So when are we getting married? Don't you think things are pretty good the way they are now? We're comfortable together. We're happy together. There are no obligations, no chains. I'm no longer the person I used to be, someone who only wanted to follow a predetermined path through life. Now, what I want most is to make myself happy first. So that means you could leave at any time, doesn't it? Smiling, I nestled into his arms. Paul, I still love you very much right now. As for the future, let's just let things happen naturally. He remained silent for a long time before holding me closer and kissing me. Can I drink again tomorrow? No. His stomach wasn't in great condition, and I had forced him to quit drinking long ago. But Atlas and Jingqiu are coming tomorrow. I haven't seen him in a year. And besides, they've gotten remarried. Doesn't that deserve a celebration? There was an obvious implication behind his words. I didn't respond to it, but I nodded. Then you can drink just once. After that, no more. All right. You're so strict. Well, you chose me yourself. Fair enough. I'll take responsibility for my choice. What he probably never imagined was that this choice would end up lasting a lifetime.